Hey everyone, welcome to the That's Allowed podcast. I'm your hostess, Dr. Audrienne McKeon, and today we're here with Carol Graham. Carol, please introduce yourself.
It's so nice to be here because I've followed you. I've listened to some of your podcasts. I'm a podcaster as well, so I do appreciate that. What can I tell you about me? I am an author. I'm a podcaster. I am a mother, a grandmother. I have 3 jewelry stores. I have a podcast that's been going for 7 years entitled Never Ever Give Up Hope. And basically, that's what I'm about. I'm someone who went through hell, lived to tell about it, and share it on a regular basis.
Wonderful. So, my podcast is all about helping people see that life happens for them, not to them, and that everything we go through, you don't go through it just to go through it. So, I think it's so inspirational to see people like you who have been through so much just giving their stories to the world so that they can use them and they can have that hope and that inspiration from that story. So I do want to give you an opportunity to just tell a little bit about your journey to where you are right now before we jump into talking about hindsight 2020.
My journey I was 67 when I decided to start a new career. And that career was author, podcaster, et cetera, and motivational speaker. Although I had been speaking for over 25 years to audiences of every type, I wanted to focus more when I switched to my story because I'm one of those people, and I know there are many in your audience who, if they've had horrendous things happen to them in their lives, they try to hide it. They
Hmm.
cover it up. They don't necessarily want to share it. Maybe people will think less of me. Maybe they will look at me in a different way. And so we bury it. Also, we bury it because of the pain. But I have been someone who lost 2 children, has had my husband imprisoned falsely and then pardoned. I have had cancer, and when the doctor told me I wouldn't live, I said, I'll find my own cure, and I did. I have been gang raped and left for dead. I have lost 2 businesses, which shouldn't have happened except for greed from my partners, and the list goes on. As an author, like I said, when my career changed and I wrote my book, that's what pole vaulted me into a new career as author, speaker about never giving up hope, and podcaster for about the last 7 or 8 years, I guess.
Wow. I mean, so much in there, but let's
Right.
get into let's get into 2020. Maybe we'll kind of come back to some
Absolutely.
of that amazing stuff.
Because where we are now is we it's where we came from, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah. All part of the journey. So, question: what is the greatest gift that the year 2020 gave to you?
after my husband had a brain injury and he was not going to be able to work probably for the rest of his life. He was only in his 40s. And um, because of my own healing that I found through nutrition, I was able to help him. And so after 7 years of being bedridden, etc., we came to a place where he was improved to the point where we could open our business back up, which is a jewelry store. When we did that, things were great. And it was in our small town, one of the key places to go to because we offered so many services, including custom made jewelry, etc. Things were great. And then recession hit and the bottom fell out. And we tried to sell after we were there about 11 years. We tried to sell, it wasn't selling. Everybody was basically in the same position. And we just didn't know what we were going to do. We had to have an income, you've reached that point. And then COVID hit.
Right.
And of course, everybody, all around us was beginning to really hurt and feel the crunch. But what it did for us was we live in a peninsula where people always went to the big city to shop. They didn't have that option anymore. And our business went through the roof. Just, it was amazing. Like we almost felt guilty because there are so many people hurting. And yet here we are, not just surviving like we have been, but thriving. And it opened up all kinds of new avenues. And one of the biggest changes was being able to give back to all those people who had helped us those
Mm.
years. So COVID was a blessing in every way, not just for us, but for those around us.
Wow. Wow, that's so wonderful. I mean, a lot of these stories are like, well, COVID taught me this important life lesson, but you
Well,
really thrived.
it
That's wonderful.
did, it did me too, because
Yeah.
my whole life lesson has been never to give up.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we did. We stuck with it, and it paid off in ways we never thought it would.
That's incredible. So, you've been through so many things. And I think, it's one thing when you've sort of been through one big trauma, but it's like trauma after trauma after trauma. Is there a part of you that says, what if there's something wrong with me? Like, what if this is me? What if I'm like attracting this or creating this? Does that go through your mind?
It hasn't for many years, but certainly in those years of struggle,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that people who do go through so much, they try to hide it, because
Exactly.
it feels like I shouldn't be going through this, not because, things are whatever's happening around me, but it just that, what did I do wrong? And I knew I made mistakes, and we both did. We made some terrible business mistakes. We trusted the wrong people. But
Hmm.
instead of dwelling on that, again, turning it around in, what did we learn from this? We won't do it again. And it's what I said, there's two things you need in every life, and that is attitude and humor. And both of
Absolutely.
those things.
Absolutely.
And even when my husband was going through all those years in bed, I still made him laugh, like belly laughs, when there was nothing to laugh about and we had no income and the
Mhm.
world was crashing in. But I made him laugh. And if you know what, if you make somebody else laugh, you end up laughing too. And when you can laugh at yourself,
Ugh, endless
even
material.
better.
Endless material. I always
Exactly.
love someone, and I don't remember who said this, but they said life can be roughly divided into two categories. Either it was a good time or it's a good story.
I like that. Or both.
Exactly. Sometimes both. Sometimes both. I think the wonderful sort of transcendent moments are the ones where even in the midst of a messed up situation, you can kind of step out of it for a moment and see the humor and laugh. Those are just some of my favorite memories of
That's
just
right.
being
You're
like
right.
in the middle of just like a messed up situation, but then realizing this is temporary. It's gonna pass.
Right.
This is gonna be hilarious someday. Why not laugh now?
And
Absolutely.
hopefully they'll laugh with you, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Rather than at you. So, what do you think have been some of the greatest lessons you've learned? I mean, people always say, like, oh, this is a great opportunity for growth. Wow, you've had plenty of opportunities for growth, lots of life lessons in there. What are some of your biggest takeaways from your experiences?
I think there's the common thread, which I already said, and that
Yeah,
is to never give
never
up.
give up hope. Yeah.
And because no matter what we're beaten with, battered with, bruised, broken, all the things that could crush us, we maintain the right attitude. And that's not easy. And I do a lot of counseling, and I also do a lot of coaching
Yeah.
as well. And this is what people really need to hear. And you know what? It's not just words. And I think that's what we really have to be careful with, because you can very, nonchalantly say, well, you need a good attitude, or you need to laugh about that or whatever. But no, stories to me have been key. Telling
Mhm.
my story. I've written 3 books now, and basically
I'll
they
tell
are
one out.
stories, because the stories, sorry,
I'm sorry. My cat is so rude. Cats, man, they're so rude.
cat has a story.
Okay,
But
please
it's
continue.
it's the stories that people can relate to. And
Yes.
in my book, there's 12 chapters, 12 traumas. So I think that I've covered all the bases as far as things that could go wrong. I've been there. So this is how I did it, but it's written as a novel. And so it's a really good story, and people relate to stories and they see themselves in that story. It's like watching a good movie. So,
Absolutely. I think resilience is so
yeah,
key, so key. And I always say, I can't really relate to people who haven't been through something. I mean, you can just tell when someone has that resilience
right.
and
Absolutely.
when someone does not. And any little thing that goes wrong, they're just panicking and freaking out because they haven't been through something significant and they don't know how to handle it. They don't have the tools.
It's like I say, they throw a pity party and no one shows up,
Yeah.
you know.
And I think we've all been there. I mean, to be
Course.
fair, like
Absolutely. You
y-
stub your toe, you want people to feel sorry for you, you know?
I was my one of my favorite lines that it's like you have these kind of repeated like lines that you say. One of my favorite famous lines is, "Where's my parade?"
Yes, yes, that's good. That's good.
Like
Yeah.
I
I
I
think,
survived that. Where's my parade?
right, right. Where's the confetti? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all deserve a parade every once in a while.
That's great.
Yeah. So, stories are I just absolutely think it's so important to tell our stories. And as you said, shame is one of the biggest reasons why people don't tell their stories, that they feel ashamed or they feel embarrassed or they feel like people will judge them. So, can you give people just some tools for kind of fixing that self-talk whenever they want to tell a story or they want to share something significant and that little voice comes in and is like, I don't think you should tell them that. I think that's kind of embarrassing. I think they might have some judgments on that. What can they say to themselves in those moments?
Well, I have a story.
Please.
I'll answer it through a story.
Beautiful.
When my daughter was 16 years old, she had a puppy, a little miniature dachshund, and she was going to be going away for 3 weeks to, I think it was Costa Rica. And so she said, Mom, could you babysit? Louis Vuitton was his name. Could you babysit Louis? And he had class. And could you baby? And of course, of course I'll babysit him. But I had no idea that babysitting that dog was going to change my life. And what happened is from the very first day she went away, he had seen her pack her suitcase. And so the evening that she left, my husband and I were sitting in the living room and we heard the thump, the thump, the thump coming down the stairs. And here was this 6-week-old little puppy, or 6-month-old, sorry, little puppy, and they're just little guys anyway. And he was bringing down his heavy Louis Vuitton bag, and it was about 4 times the size of him, and he's bringing it down the stairs. And we're like, what? Well, after he got it done, we thought, okay, turn the TV off. We didn't know, but we figured we were going to be entertained. So then he scampered back up the stairs. There's 14 stairs, so it's a lot for a little guy with short legs. Scampered back up the stairs, and he started bringing down his things. He brought down his dish and his leash and his blankie and his toys and his everything that he owned in this life. He brought down one by one. Now we got the popcorn out. We're watching this unfold. We still don't know where it's going. So he then proceeded to put his things into the bag. Impossible for a dog with the short legs, but I knew we couldn't help him. He had to do this himself. And so he would jump and jump, and then he would kind of toss his things in. He got everything in the bag, and we're like, okay, what's next? He proceeds to jump in. We still hadn't clued in what he was doing. And so as he jumped and jumped and jumped until he got in, of course, head first and got it. Then he tried from the inside with his little teeth to close the zipper. I'm not kidding. This took like 2 hours, as you can imagine.
Oh.
And he got it. And so at that point, I thought, I don't know what's on this dog's agenda, but I'm going to help him close the zipper. So I got up, closed the zipper. He stayed there all night. The next morning, we got up, opened up the zipper. He jumps out and he looks around, barking and running. He packed his suitcase
Mhm.
like his mom packed her suitcase.
Oh.
I know, heartbreaking.
Oh.
And he was looking, he thought he was someplace else. So, what I did with that and how it changed my life was my daughter, she was 16 at the time, had watched her mom go through hell over and over and over again. And she kept saying, "Mom, you need to tell your story." And I would go, "Yeah, whatever." Yes, you need to tell your story, Mom. People need to know that you can survive all the horrendous things that happen to you. Yeah, whatever. Just be quiet. I'm not going to tell my story. And then while she was gone, those 14 days or whatever it was, 21 days, I wrote a journal of everything that her dog did and took pictures for the day. At Christmas time, I had put that into a book and I gave it to her as a hardcover published book for her for Christmas. And she opened it up and tears are running down her face. And she was laughing and crying. And she said, "Mom, now will you tell your story?" And it just hit me. If a dog has a story with a message, who am I to think that I don't have a story too? And consequently, I wrote my story. It took me 10 years, had it published, and then from there, everything just exploded. The world needs to hear what you went through and how you made it. I didn't make it into a sad story. I made it into an incredibly funny and encouraging story, and one totally full of hope, not devastation, which you would think all those things. And does that answer your question? Was
Absolutely.
kind
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think that's the self-talk that you need to have in those moments is that everyone's story is
Right,
worth telling because you never know who needs that story. There is someone out there who
right.
is waiting for your story
You got it.
to change their life.
And the interesting thing about that, when she told me to do it, and I asked her why, she said, "Because my generation needs to hear your story."
Yeah.
Totally different generation. And yet she saw that people of her generation need to know these kind of things happen to people as they go through life. She was only 16, right?
Mhm.
So it's never too you're never too young and never too old to tell your story, basically.
Absolutely. So, my stepfather was also falsely accused of a crime and later pardoned. So, I can really relate to that feeling of just complete helplessness at the hands of our justice
Right,
system.
right.
I call it our legal system because there's sometimes not
Not
so much
just
with the justice.
right,
And it really is. It feels so overwhelming to be against, the system,
mm,
fighting the system. And, it's one thing when it's like a bad thing has happened to you, like loss, you're grieving, there's nothing you can do about it, it's over. But when you're fighting that fight, it can be so kind of demoralizing to feel
right,
like I can't stop. Like you can't give up this
right,
fight. Like you said, you can never ever give up. But at the same time, there's no healing in sight. There's no end in sight.
right, right.
And so I think those stories especially are really important to share that there can be a light at the end of that tunnel. That there
Yes,
can be justice, that sometimes they do get pardoned and it does get recognized that this was wrong. Now, that doesn't take away the pain and it doesn't fix
right,
everything.
right.
But yeah, I mean, you really never can give up hope. I it's
That's
so it's
right.
it's so simple, but
Yeah,
and yet I think so many of us it's the obvious thing to do to just say, "Well, I tried." I love the Simpsons quote. "I've tried everything. I've tried
right,
nothing and I'm out of
right.
ideas." You know? It's like I've tried everything I can think of. What now? And I think those are the moments of surrender. Those are the moments where you recognize that there's nothing more that you can do, but you're not the only one here. and you can reach out for help, and you can pray, and you can reach into that deep part of yourself that is connected to everyone and everything else that is beyond you, and find more strength than you even knew was there.
That's interesting that you brought up pray, because one of the um, actually coaching sessions that I teach on is how to pray the answer.
Hmm.
It's very different from praying and begging.
Right. I always try to pray in gratitude.
Yes,
Even if it's something that I don't
yes,
have yet, I just
that's
pray
right.
for thank you that this, yeah, I know that,
Yes,
you have our best interests at heart. I know that you are looking for the greater good. And so I just thank you in
that's
advance that I
right. You're
know
right.
you're going to help us out of
Bang
this.
on. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
And it
how do you,
also changes your attitude,
oh, big time, big time.
because again, the pity party is not there, because you're finding things to be grateful for and know that there will be resolution. So that's the attitude.
Yeah. I think so many times in life, I don't know if this has happened to you, but I assume, given everything that's happened, that this has happened, that there are times when you think, why me? Why did this happen to me? And then later you see, oh, that's why. That's why. And I've had this experience where, we had a business that we put a lot of money into and a
Right.
lot of time into. And it was it was related to kind of Airbnb. I won't go into the details, but we ran into some legal issues and the whole thing fell apart, just disintegrated. And then I think about that now and I go, oh my gosh, we would have been dead in the water anyway.
Right.
We would have been completely dead in the water,
Right.
and much later on after we'd sunk much more time and
Right.
money into
Right.
it.
Absolutely.
And so thank goodness that happened at the time that it did. But at the time, it certainly
Right.
didn't seem like a
No,
blessing.
no.
So how do you pray the answer?
You have to take my course.
Okay, fantastic. Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's very long and very detailed, but essentially, I don't know, where you're coming from, but I use scripture. And the
Hmm.
scripture has the promise, and I dwell on the promise instead of the problem. So that's praying the answer. It's the
Yeah,
promise.
the
And we
promise.
know that God can't lie, so he's in our court, and it happens. It absolutely happens. It's guaranteed.
Beautiful. So I'm going to walk you through a little exercise now that I love to bring my guests
Uh-oh.
through. If you've heard the podcast, then you've heard this before. But
Yes.
so I'd like you to just close your eyes for a moment. Just get nice and comfortable. And I'm going to wave my magic wand. And now everything that you deeply desire has come to pass. Everything that you have really, on a heart soul level, been wanting is now here and is now real. And so I want you to just sort of, with your eyes still closed, because I find this works best, just look around this experience. Tell me what you see, what you taste, smell, touch, all your senses are on and open in this ideal scene. What do you see first?
Well, I teach on the same thing about using our senses, so I can totally relate. And you can break it down sense by sense. But what I see always is resolution. And
Tell me what that
whatever
looks
I am
like.
facing, there's resolution.
So what's
Yeah.
the resolution you're seeing right now? What's coming to you?
I don't have anything in particular.
So it's
I'm
just
I'm usually I'm mostly thinking about other people's problems and issues and all the people that I'm dealing with. But
okay, well then let's expand this. Let's
okay.
go into an ideal situation for humanity. I'm going to wave this magic wand, and we have come through the worst of this COVID situation. We have come through the kind of worst of the system that we are kind of wading through right now. And there is a new system in place here on Earth. And I want you to just be in that experience for a moment. Just what,
That would be lack of fear, because I think that's one thing that is driving people. where they can't cope anymore. And
So
so
is it lack of fear or is it bravery? Because I don't think you can really get rid of fear, or nor would you necessarily want to, because fear can be a useful thing, right? If we had no fear, we'd do absolutely crazy, insane things. But that courage, that bravery, people have that ability to face up to their fears. What does that look like?
I think I'm going to stick with lack of fear
Okay.
because I have been, or you can be, very brave in a situation, but still be very fearful at the same time.
Mhm.
So when am saying lack of fear is that you're not afraid. So you don't have to be brave. You're not hearing all the negative reports. You're not hearing all the propaganda. You're not hearing all the fearful things that could happen, but you are in a place where you it doesn't affect you. And that's not, I don't think, being brave. You just don't allow that to penetrate those negative thoughts into changing who you are or who you want to be or what you want to do. And I don't live there. I can't remember ever living there. No matter what I went through, I just don't allow it. And so it's overcoming that by not allowing it.
So what does that experience look like of fearlessness? What does that I'm trying to get people to just visualize this with you. So what does it look like to be in a world where people are making choices that are not fear-based?
I don't know if I can answer that, but just come back to what I just said is that I think it's a choice. And we can choose to allow things to affect us in a negative way, or like you said earlier, to turn those around and say, what have I learned from this? How can this help me? This is not a stumbling block. This is a stepping stone. And so then you are not afraid of what you're facing. But everybody's different. I certainly cannot speak for anybody else other than myself.
Well,
And if
then
I
let's
know,
come back to you. So what is it? I want to go a little bit deeper here. I feel like
what
there's there's always something next, right? There's always something more. What is it that you desire more of in your life right now?
I can't think of anything. I'm
So your
not a
life is
very good
perfect. It's
student.
ideal. Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So tell me,
I
what is
take
it?
I take it a day at a time,
Yeah.
whatever hits. I don't know how to second guess the future, I guess.
Well, we're not second guessing. What I'm trying to get you into is a space where you really can visualize that exactly what you wish can be real for you right now.
I've always lived there for as
Yeah.
long as I can remember.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of changing. I know what you're trying to say as far
Hmm.
as what people need to do, but I think if they if they look at things from the positive, they look at things outside the realm of fear, they look at things that, are good instead of negative, they will end up living there. And that's what changes. They keep the
Hmm.
sense of humor, they keep the right perspective on things. They stop blaming others. They learn to forgive.
Hmm.
All those things that we know we should do, we learn to be grateful instead of the opposite. And on and on. When we choose to live there, and it is a conscious effort all the time.
Hmm.
I don't think we ever attain it 100% because we're always working at it. And if you think you're someplace, I think what you're trying to say is, what about when something comes by and throws you off kilter, sideswipes you, whatever, blindsides you? I mean,
No, that's not really what I'm talking.
oh, okay, okay. Then I'm totally on a different page, I guess. But
That's okay. That's okay. So what this exercise is really about, most people, they are thinking about what's probable. They're thinking about what's probable, not what's possible. And so I like to take I like to take people into this realm of what could be possible? What could I visualize? What could I create for myself? And just put myself in there right now, because I think people think, "Oh, well, that's just my imagination." Well, your imagination is incredibly powerful. And even putting yourself in an imaginary space temporarily and creating those emotions of being there can actually help it become in the world, because focus really does determine reality. I know that you know that because you've had to choose over and over again to focus on the positive rather than on all of the negative that's coming at you, right?
I'm a realist. And I think that's what you're asking is when you are there, when it is really happening.
Mm-hmm.
Even I still refuse to allow that realism to affect me in my attitude, in what I want to achieve, in where I'm going, in who I want to be, in who I am helping. Does that kind of
Yeah. So when you are, I mean, I think there's two different things here. There's when you are in a situation where you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling, sort of attacked and traumatized. And how do you kind of come back to a place of, centeredness and retaining hope?
the line that I use all the time is when you buy the thought, you buy the lie.
Mhm.
And in a nutshell, that's what answers that. I refuse to buy the thought. That doesn't take away from the fact. The fact is reality, but the thought is what determines where I'm going from here. And
Right.
so I don't buy the thought. I rebuke the thought. I refuse the thought. I don't allow the thought. I think on good things and positive things. And how can I turn this around? Doesn't matter what pain I'm in the middle of. And that pain is real, but we don't have to live there. We're just traveling through it.
Right.
And I don't know if that helps you or not.
Yeah, well, I think that, like I said, focus determines reality. And so you need to, you can't focus on a negative, right? You can't say, I don't want that. You need to focus on what you do want. Does that make sense?
I guess. Okay.
This is just what I've found that it's very difficult to block something out, to say, like if I say, don't think about elephants, immediately you're thinking about elephants. And so instead, you need to think about something that is not
Right. That's
elephants,
what I
something
just,
else,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And
It's
so,
focus. It's
yeah, it's
focus.
focus. And so I guess what I'm asking is, what do you think the world needs to focus on now?
Hope.
Hope. And so what does hope feel like in your body? Can you try to get people to understand what hope, how they can create hope for themselves, and what that experience is?
I just taught on this the other day, funnily enough, about the helmet of hope, and that's out of scripture. And what the helmet of hope is, it literally is putting on good thoughts. And again, not you know disregarding what you're going through, and whatever. And I deal with people, and I'm sure you have, who have,
Mhm.
you wonder how they ever made it through any of this.
Yeah.
And they it's baby steps, so it's not just automatically one day you wake up and you say, I'm going to be hopeful today and things are going to be better. It's baby steps, and taking those baby steps by a moment at a time. When something
Yeah.
happens, instead of allowing yourself to go into a negative mode, saying, I didn't get that parking spot, so maybe there's a better one. That's a pathetic example, but it is in essence the same thing. This didn't work out. Okay, so what can I do to change it so that it doesn't happen again, or that I can look at this differently? Um, Attitude, hope, humor.
Humor's
In
big.
everything, in everything. When
Yeah.
the doctor told me, or told us, that my husband would be was going to be brain dead, that there was not any hope, etc. Of course, I'm in shock. Of course, I cried tears.
Yeah.
But the first thing I did was, when I said to him, well, now you'll be just like me. It made him laugh. And of course, that's not true. But instead, he's much smarter than me. In other words, we'll both be brain dead. That was
Uh-huh.
the point, being that It's all in how we look at it. And I apologize for not maybe grasping what you're trying to get across, but what I always teach people is the end of the rainbow, the prophetic future, what is going to happen, what good is going to come, and not dwell on where you are right now, because that's going to pass. So
Right,
I'm
right.
not going to stay there. Like
Yeah,
somebody says, when I go through hell, notice the word through. I'm not in hell. I went through hell.
yeah,
And so I'm going through, and you just keep moving. You don't become stagnant in that negative world.
yeah. Well, where are you headed next? What's next for you?
I'm writing more books.
Mhm.
I am hoping for speaking more as soon as things open up. This,
Okay, well,
just
let's
more of the same.
Right. So I'm gonna try this one more time. I'm gonna try this one
Okay.
more time. Okay. So I'm gonna have you close your eyes.
Okay.
And you are now standing on a stage. And the stage has beautiful warm lights on you. You can feel that on your skin. You have a nice comfortable podium. You've got some nice cool water there. And you look out into the crowd and you can see they're all there to see you. And they are just so excited. You can feel that energy, that excitement in the crowd, that they're here to hear your story and to be inspired by you. I just want you to feel that for a moment. Just feel that feeling. And then you see someone out in the crowd, and you can just tell by looking at them that they are really going to resonate with what you're about to say. And as you're telling your story, they are just on the edge of their seat. You can see that. You can see those little wheels turning in their eyes, and they're realizing, wow, I'm next. I'm going to tell my story next. And how does that feel to you?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I've been speaking for over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until maybe the last 10 or so that I've been sharing my story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how I function. I look over my crowd from one end to the other. I find the person who I refer to as a receiver, and I
Yes.
speak to them,
Yeah.
not just to them, but specifically to them.
Yeah.
And when I see them with crossed arms and an attitude of I'm not listening because she's not going to help me anyway,
Mm-hmm.
to halfway through a relaxing, and then three-quarters of the way through tears, and at the end of the time I walk up to her and I will say to her or to him,
Mm-hmm.
I really resonated with you today, and I
Right.
will I will specifically talk to that person. I will seek that person out. If there's more than one, which there often is, of course, the same thing applies. But yes, it's exactly what I do,
Yeah.
and it works because your audience, and I know you've heard this 100 times. If you've heard it once, your audience doesn't care how much you know; they want to know how much you care.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Very, very true. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, where can the people at home find you?
Carol Graham or Battered Hope, and or Never Ever Give Up Hope. And there'll be pages on Google. My show is one of the what was one is the number one show on hope, and
That's
has been
wonderful.
for many years. And the stories of the people that I interview, if you like stories, oh my word, every interview is from a person who was in a place where they should have given up and they didn't, and their story is remarkable. So there are a lot of people out there with stories of never giving up,
Fantastic.
persevering, pushing through, and being successful in whatever they choose to do.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there anything else? In fact, I'd love to see, to hear. Obviously, the message of never give up hope is the main message, the main takeaway here. But is there anything else that you want to really leave the audience with today?
Interestingly enough, when I was getting ready today, I thought of something to say to you, and that is boundaries, or not boundaries, but limitations.
Mm,
We have no limitations. When someone asks me how old I am, and I have, or if I think about how old I am, immediately there comes a limitation. Well, I've only got maybe 5 years left or 10 years left or whatever. But no, it's what I can do now. I'm not limited by how old I am or who I am or where I am. No limitations. And if you see yourself without limitations, you are going to achieve a lot more in what you
Wonderful.
want to do.
Thank you so much for being here, Carol.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. You challenged me.
It's what I do.
Okay. Thank you.